Part 1. You are wearing a memorial on your arm, and you do not even understand what it means. The alien cadet's voice carried across the training hall, followed by a wave of quiet laughter from the students surrounding him. Daniel Brooks looked down at the tattoo covering his left forearm, then slowly pulled his sleeve back into place. He did not look angry. He did not look embarrassed. He simply looked tired, like a man who had heard the same joke from people who had no idea they were repeating history. The Galactic Defense Academy was built above the clouds of Aurelian Prime, a place where the brightest military minds from dozens of species came to learn strategy, diplomacy, and command. For most of the cadets walking through its polished halls, humanity was still the new arrival. A young species, a curious species, a species that had survived mostly through stubbornness and luck. That was what they believed anyway. Is it some kind of human tradition? Cadet Cale Theron asked, stepping closer with a confident smile. His silver-armored uniform reflected the lights above, showing the rank symbols of one of the most respected military families in the Vare Dominion. A reminder of your ancestors? A tribal mark? Several cadets laughed again. Daniel watched them for a moment before answering. Something like that. Cale tilted his head. He expected an argument. Humans usually had something to prove, at least according to the stories he had heard. You are not offended? Cale asked. Most species would defend their honor. Daniel shrugged slightly. I have learned that not every opinion deserves a response. That answer made the room quieter for a second. Not because it was threatening. It was because it sounded like something a person said after learning a lesson the hard way. Daniel turned toward the training stations and continued preparing his equipment. He was not at the academy to impress anyone. He was not there to become famous. After 15 years in the human expeditionary forces, he had already spent enough time being noticed. He came here because the galaxy was changing, and someone needed to make sure the next generation understood the difference between having power and knowing when not to use it. Across the room, another human cadet named Maya Collins watched the exchange carefully. She had noticed something others had missed. Daniel never touched the tattoo casually. Every time someone mentioned it, his fingers moved toward it for just a moment before he stopped himself. Like a person remembering a place they could never return to. You know, Maya said quietly as she walked beside him. Most people would have said something back. Daniel looked at her and gave a small smile. Most people have not spent years learning when silence says more. Before Maya could respond, the main doors opened and Commander Lyra Voss entered the training hall. The entire room straightened instantly. She was known across the academy for one thing. She noticed everything. Her eyes moved across the cadets, evaluating posture, discipline, confidence. Then they stopped on Daniel's arm. For the first time that morning, Commander Voss looked surprised. Her expression changed so quickly that most students missed it. But Daniel noticed. He always noticed. The instructor took one slow step forward and stared at the tattoo that everyone else had laughed at. The room waited for her to speak. And when she finally did, her voice was no longer the voice of a teacher correcting a student. It was the voice of someone who had just discovered that a piece of forgotten history was standing right in front of her. Where did you get that, Mark? Part 2. The moment Commander Lyra Voss asked the question, the entire training hall changed. The laughter disappeared. The confident smiles faded. Even Cadet Cale Theron stopped leaning against the equipment table and looked toward Daniel with sudden curiosity. Daniel held the commander's gaze for a few seconds before answering. It was given to me after my first deployment. Lyra did not move. That is not what I asked. Daniel looked down at his arm. For a brief moment, the calm expression he always carried slipped. Not much. Just enough for Maya Collins to notice. It was given to me by people who are not here anymore. The room became quiet again. Cale crossed his arms. He still did not understand why a simple tattoo had changed the instructor's attitude. Commander, with respect, it is only a symbol, Cale said. Lyra turned toward him. Her expression was colder than before. That is the problem. You believe it is only a symbol because you do not know what you are looking at. Cale looked uncomfortable for the first time. The other cadets exchanged uncertain glances. Commander Voss walked closer to Daniel, studying the markings carefully. They were not decorative. They were not random. Every line had purpose. Every shape had meaning. How long have you been carrying this? She asked. 12 years. And you never explained it? Daniel gave a small shrug. Nobody asked. That answer bothered her more than anything else. Not because it was arrogant, because it was completely honest. Daniel was not trying to impress anyone. He was not waiting for recognition. He had spent years carrying something important without telling the world about it. The instructor turned back toward the class. Today's lesson was supposed to be about tactical awareness. Instead, I think some of you have accidentally demonstrated the exact weakness this academy tries to remove. Cale frowned. What weakness? Assumption. The word landed harder than anyone expected. You saw something unfamiliar and immediately decided you understood it. The training hall doors suddenly opened, interrupting the lesson. A young operations officer stepped inside, holding a data tablet. Commander Voss, sorry to interrupt. We have a problem with the combat simulation system. Lyra took the tablet and scanned the report. Her eyes narrowed. What kind of problem? The system is locked in advanced scenario mode. Someone activated a historical battlefield simulation by mistake. It is requesting an instructor override. A few cadets looked excited. The academy was famous for its realistic simulations. They were difficult, but they were still only simulations. Cale smiled slightly. Maybe this is a good chance to see what the human can really do. Daniel looked at the display. The name of the simulation appeared across the screen. For the first time since entering the academy, his expression completely changed. Maya noticed immediately. Daniel, she whispered. He did not answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen. Commander Voss noticed too. She stepped closer. You know this scenario? Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he quietly said, yes. How? She asked. Daniel looked at the simulation title again, and the memory behind his eyes became impossible to hide. Because I was there when it happened. No one laughed this time. The doors to the training chamber closed behind them, and the academy prepared to witness something none of the cadets expected. A lesson was about to begin, but not the lesson they thought they came to learn. The simulation chamber went silent as the display finished loading. Across the massive holographic screen, a battlefield from 15 years earlier appeared. Not a training exercise designed by the academy. Not a theoretical scenario created by instructors. This was a real operation, recorded from a time when humanity was still considered an unknown force in the galaxy. Daniel Brooks stood several feet away from the console, watching the images appear one by one. He did not look proud. He did not look excited. He looked like someone opening a door he had spent years keeping closed. Daniel, Maya said quietly, you do not have to do this if you do not want to. He glanced at her and gave a small nod of appreciation. I know. Then why are you staying? She asked. Daniel looked back at the simulation. Because if they are going to learn from it, they should learn the truth. Commander Lyra Voss watched him carefully. She had trained thousands of cadets from dozens of worlds, but she had rarely seen someone react to a battlefield memory with that much restraint. Most warriors wanted recognition. They wanted others to know what they had done. Daniel seemed to want the opposite. The simulation began. The cadets gathered around the observation area, expecting a simple history lesson. Cale Theron stood near the front, still trying to understand why the instructor treated Daniel differently. So this is the famous human strategy? Cale asked. A recording? Daniel ignored the comment. The first part of the simulation showed a human unit entering unfamiliar territory with limited resources. The alien cadets watched closely. At first, they saw nothing impressive. The human equipment looked older. The communication systems looked basic compared to modern standards. The tactics appeared simple. A few cadets exchanged knowing looks. Then the simulation continued. They started noticing things they had missed. The humans were not relying on superior technology. They were adapting. They were studying the environment. They were predicting the decisions of opponents who believed they were smarter. That does not make sense, one cadet whispered. Their equipment was outdated. Daniel finally spoke. Yes. The cadet looked surprised. Then how did they succeed? Daniel paused. Because equipment is only one part of a conflict. Cale stepped closer. You are saying training matters more than technology? No, Daniel replied. I am saying people matter more than technology. The answer bothered Cale because it was not the response he expected. He wanted arrogance. He wanted Daniel to claim humans were naturally superior. Instead, Daniel gave credit to discipline, preparation, and teamwork. Commander Voss studied the reactions around the room. Some cadets were still skeptical. Others had stopped judging. But Cale remained unconvinced. Anyone can analyze an old battle, Cale said. That does not prove you are special. Daniel looked at him. There was no anger in his expression, only patience. You are right. Cale blinked. I am. Yes, I am not special. For a moment, nobody knew what to say. Daniel looked back at the simulation. That is the part people always get wrong. They think one person changes history. Usually, it is thousands of ordinary people making the right choice when it matters. Those words stayed in the room longer than anyone expected. Then the simulation reached the final stage. The Academy system highlighted the mission commander profile. The cadets leaned forward. They expected to see the name of some famous human general. Instead, the screen displayed a name none of them recognized. Daniel Brooks. The room froze. Cale looked from the screen to Daniel. You were the commander? Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment. I was the one who made the call. Commander Voss stepped closer to the display. She already knew the tattoo meant something important. But now she understood something else. Daniel was not hiding a symbol of victory. He was carrying the memory of a responsibility that most people would never want. And for the first time, the cadets stopped looking at him as a quiet human with an old tattoo. They started wondering what else they did not know. The simulation changed without warning. The quiet historical recording disappeared, replaced by a live emergency scenario generated from the Academy's advanced combat system. Warning lights appeared along the walls as the training chamber shifted into a full tactical environment. The cadets who had been watching Daniel Brooks as a curiosity suddenly found themselves inside the kind of situation they were supposed to prepare for. Unexpected system activation announced the Academy interface. Scenario difficulty, maximum. Cale Theron looked around with surprise. This is not part of today's lesson. Commander Lyra Voss stepped toward the control panel. No, it is not. She attempted to override the simulation, but the system continued running. The training core has locked itself. We will need to complete the scenario before access is restored. The cadets quickly moved into formation. They had trained for situations like this. They knew the procedures. They knew the technology. They knew the rules. But within the first few minutes, Daniel noticed something everyone else missed. The simulation was not testing their strength. It was testing their decision-making. Everyone is watching the objective marker, Daniel said calmly. Cale turned toward him. That is because the objective tells us where to go. Daniel looked at the digital map. Exactly. Which means whoever designed this expects everyone to follow it. Maya studied the map beside him. You think it is a trap? Daniel nodded. I think it is a lesson. The team moved through the simulated environment, an abandoned research facility built across several levels. The alien cadets relied on their advanced scanners and communication systems, quickly identifying paths and possible solutions. Daniel moved differently. He watched patterns. He looked at what was missing instead of what was obvious. Why are you ignoring the direct route? Cale asked. Because everyone else would take it, Daniel replied. Cale shook his head. You always answer like there is some hidden meaning. Daniel gave a small smile. Usually there is. As the group reached the center of the facility, the system changed again. The original objective disappeared. New information appeared. The team had limited time to protect a civilian transport unit represented inside the simulation. Several routes opened at once, and the cadets immediately began debating which one was best. Voices overlapped. Plans changed. Confidence turned into confusion. Daniel stepped forward. Stop. The single word cut through the noise. Everyone looked at him. We are trying to win the scenario, Daniel said. That is why we are losing it. Cale frowned. Explain. You are thinking like competitors. The people inside this simulation are depending on us to think like protectors. Commander Voss watched silently from the observation system. She understood what the cadets were seeing now. Daniel was not teaching them how to fight. He was teaching them how to make decisions when every option had a cost. The team adjusted their approach. They stopped chasing the fastest solution and started working together. The simulation became more difficult, but their coordination improved. When the final objective was completed, the room returned to normal. The lights stabilized. The system unlocked. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Cale looked at Daniel differently now. Not with admiration yet. Not completely, but with uncertainty. The kind that appears when someone realizes their first impression was wrong. Commander Voss walked toward Daniel. You knew this scenario would change. Daniel shook his head. No, I just knew the mistake people make when they think they already know everything. She looked at the tattoo on his arm again. This time, she did not see an old mark. She saw a reminder of a lesson the galaxy had forgotten. And somewhere deep inside the Academy archives, there was still a missing chapter about the unit that carried that symbol. The archive room beneath Galactic Defense Academy had not been opened in 7 years. Commander Lyra Voss stood in front of the sealed terminal, staring at the old security clearance request that had appeared after the simulation ended. The name attached to the request was the reason she had brought Daniel Brooks there. Not as a student, not as a curiosity, as someone who carried a piece of history that most of the galaxy had forgotten. "You understand why I asked you to come here," Lyra said. Daniel looked through the glass walls of the archive chamber. Thousands of records filled the shelves behind protective barriers. "Because you recognize the mark." Lyra nodded slowly. "Not just the mark, the absence of information around it." Daniel looked back at her. "What do you mean?" She activated the terminal. An old military symbol appeared on the screen, the same symbol that was on Daniel's arm. The Black Horizon unit was removed from most public records after the Orion conflict. Daniel's expression changed slightly. Removed is a polite way to say buried. Lyra studied him carefully. Why would humanity hide a unit that achieved something every major power in the galaxy considered impossible? Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he answered, "Because winning was not the important part." Lyra frowned. "Then what was?" "Making sure nobody had to win that way again." The answer surprised her. She expected pride. She expected a veteran to talk about victories and achievements. Instead, Daniel talked about consequences. Before Lyra could ask more, the archive doors opened. Kale Theron walked in with several other cadets behind him. They had been curious after the simulation, and curiosity had turned into something they could not ignore. "Commander, we heard there was an archived record connected to the human." Lyra looked at them. "This is restricted information." Kale stepped forward. "Then why was he allowed to carry that symbol into our academy, without anyone knowing?" Daniel glanced at him. "Because I never asked anyone to know." Kale hesitated. That answer was harder to challenge than arrogance would have been. He wanted Daniel to be hiding something because he was proud. Instead, Daniel seemed to be carrying something heavy. Lyra opened the file. The room filled with old recordings and mission reports. The cadets expected to see advanced weapons, impossible technology, or some secret human advantage. What they saw instead surprised them. They saw ordinary humans making difficult decisions under impossible conditions. They saw engineers, pilots, medics, and soldiers working together without knowing if they would succeed. "This cannot be right," one cadet whispered. "Their resources were limited." Daniel nodded. "They were. Their technology was behind ours." "Yes." Kale looked confused. "Then why did they become so important?" Daniel looked at the screen. "Because they understood something that many civilizations forget." He paused. "A team is not measured by what it has when everything goes well. It is measured by what it does when everything goes wrong." Before anyone could respond, an emergency alert interrupted the archive. The Academy system detected an external security failure. Not a training exercise this time. A real issue. The lights shifted to emergency mode. Cadets immediately started moving, but uncertainty spread through the room. Lyra checked the alert. "Several systems are offline. We have a communications problem across the lower academy levels." Kale looked toward Daniel. For the first time, there was no mockery in his voice. "What do we do?" Daniel looked at the young cadets around him. He saw the same mistake he had seen many times before. They were waiting for someone stronger to take control. He calmly walked toward the exit. "First, we stop assuming we know what is happening." Lyra followed him. And then, Daniel looked at the academy halls ahead. "Then we find out what the real problem is." The cadets followed behind them, unaware that the next lesson would not come from a simulation. It would come from the moment when preparation became reality. The emergency lights across Galactic Defense Academy painted the corridors in a deep amber glow as Daniel Brooks moved through the lower levels with Commander Lyra Voss and the cadets following behind him. The academy was designed to handle almost any situation, but something about the silence felt wrong. Not the silence of an empty building, the silence of a place waiting. "The security systems went down 3 minutes ago," Lyra said while checking her command tablet. "The communication network is partially disabled, and several training sectors are locked." Daniel looked at the walls, the doors, the ceiling panels. He was not looking for damage. He was looking for patterns. 3 minutes, he asked. Lyra nodded. "Yes." And everyone responded exactly how they were trained to respond. She paused. "Yes." Daniel stopped walking. "That is the problem." Cale Theron looked confused. You think following procedures is a mistake? Daniel looked at the young cadet. No. Procedures keep people alive. But someone who knows your procedures can predict your next move. The group continued deeper into the academy. The other cadets were beginning to notice what made Daniel different. He did not rush. He did not panic. Every decision came after observation. Every movement had a reason. They reached the central operations room, where several academy officers were trying to restore the damaged systems. A warning appeared across the main display. Unauthorized access detected. Lyra stepped forward. Who accessed the system? The officer looked uncertain. We are still tracking it. Daniel watched the screen carefully. Then he noticed something unusual. They are not trying to break in. Everyone looked at him. What do you mean? Maya asked. Daniel pointed at the display. They are moving us. Lyra studied the data. The academy systems were creating small problems in different sections, forcing personnel away from certain areas and toward others. It was not an attack. It was a distraction. Someone is controlling the situation, Lyra said quietly. Daniel nodded. And they want us to think we are reacting. Before anyone could answer, the doors to the operations room opened. Cadet Cale's older brother, Commander Ryland Theron, entered with a security team from the Vare Dominion delegation. He was one of the Academy's most respected visitors and had been observing the training program for the past week. Commander Voss, Ryland said calmly. I believe I can explain what is happening. Lyra looked surprised. You knew about this? Ryland did not answer immediately. That hesitation told Daniel everything. You are not here to help fix the problem, Daniel said. The room became still. Ryland looked at him with a faint smile. Interesting. The human notices details faster than expected. Cale looked between them. Commander, what is going on? Ryland walked toward the main display. The Academy has become too comfortable. Too many species believe cooperation has made them safe. Lyra's expression hardened. You created this situation to prove a point. I created a controlled evaluation, Ryland replied. I wanted to see how different species respond when their advantages disappear. Daniel studied him. And you wanted to see if humans were still dangerous. Ryland looked directly at the tattoo on Daniel's arm. Especially humans. The words carried more weight than any threat. Daniel finally understood why the system had activated, why the Academy records had been accessed, why someone had chosen this exact moment. They were not testing the Academy. They were testing him. Ryland smiled slightly. Tell me, Daniel Brooks, does the symbol still mean anything when nobody remembers it? Daniel looked at the commander for a long moment. Then he answered quietly. That depends. On what? Ryland asked. Daniel looked around at the young cadets watching him. On whether the people who forgot it are ready to learn why it existed. The room fell silent. Because for the first time, the person being evaluated was not Daniel. It was everyone else. Commander Ryland Theron stood in the center of the operations room as if he owned it. Around him, Academy officers watched in disbelief while the emergency systems continued flashing across the walls. To most people in the room, Ryland looked like a respected military leader conducting a difficult evaluation. But Daniel Brooks saw something different. He saw someone who had already decided the outcome before the test began. You wanted to prove that everyone here depends too much on technology, Daniel said calmly. Ryland smiled. Correct. You disabled communication, redirected personnel, and created confusion. Also correct. But you made one mistake. The room became quiet. Ryland raised an eyebrow. And what mistake was that? Daniel looked around at the Academy staff and cadets. You assumed everyone reacts the way you would. Cale looked between them, trying to understand the conversation. What does that mean? Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the main display and studied the system map. This was never about the Academy. Ryland's expression changed slightly. Explain. Daniel pointed at several locations on the screen. You created problems in areas that would attract attention, but you avoided the sections that would actually matter during a real emergency. Commander Voss stepped closer. You were saying he wanted us looking in the wrong direction. Daniel nodded. Yes, but not because he wanted to test our response. He looked directly at Ryland. He wanted to see if anyone would question the test itself. For the first time, Ryland stopped smiling. The cadets noticed it immediately. The commander, who seemed completely in control, had finally been challenged. Impressive, Ryland said. The old stories were accurate. Daniel looked at him carefully. Old stories are usually missing details. Then fill them in. Daniel remained silent. That silence bothered Rylan more than an argument would have. You still refuse to talk about it, Rylan said. Why? Daniel looked down at his tattoo. Because too many people remember the results and forget the cost. The words changed the atmosphere in the room. Even Kale, who had spent days trying to understand Daniel, realized this was not about pride. It was about responsibility. Suddenly, the operations display changed. A new alert appeared. The Academy Training Network had been connected to Rylan's evaluation system, but something unexpected had happened. Another access point had opened. Someone else was inside. Rylan turned toward the screen. That was not part of my evaluation. Lyra immediately moved to the control panel. Then whose access is this? The answer appeared moments later. A second unidentified command source was attempting to take control of the Academy systems. The room shifted from a controlled test into a real emergency. Rylan's confidence disappeared. Impossible, he said quietly. Daniel noticed. You did not expect this. Rylan looked at him. No. Then you are in the same situation you wanted everyone else to experience. The irony was not lost on anyone. The person who created the test had become someone who needed to adapt. Lyra began organizing the cadets. Everyone moved to assigned positions. Follow emergency procedures. This time, nobody questioned her. Not even Kale. As the teams moved, Daniel stayed near the operations console, watching the new system activity. Maya joined him. You knew something like this could happen? She asked. Daniel shook his head. No, but I knew someone would eventually make a mistake. Even someone like him. Maya glanced toward Rylan. Daniel looked at the commander who had believed he understood human limitations. Especially someone like him. The Academy lights flickered again. The unknown system continued spreading through the network, revealing that Rylan's evaluation had uncovered something far more serious than he intended. And for the first time, the cadets were not watching Daniel Brooks because of his tattoo. They were watching because they needed the person behind it. The Academy had faced unexpected situations before, but nothing like this. The systems were not failing randomly. They were being redirected with a level of precision that made even Commander Rylan Theron uncomfortable. For the first time since he entered the operations room, he was no longer observing. He was trying to understand. Daniel Brooks watched the changing data streams across the main display. Whoever is doing this knows the Academy layout, Lyra said. They know our security structure, our response patterns, and our emergency protocols. Daniel nodded, which means they are not guessing. Kale stood beside the control station, looking at the information appearing across the screen. Could it be someone from outside the Academy? Lyra shook her head. No, the access level is too high. Everyone became quiet. The answer was obvious. Whoever was causing the problem already had permission to be there. Rylan looked at the system logs. This is not possible. I personally verified every security layer before starting the evaluation. Daniel glanced at him. That is exactly why it happened. Rylan looked annoyed. Explain. You were focused on proving everyone else could be surprised. You never considered that you could be the one being watched. The words hit harder than any accusation. Rylan had built an entire test around exposing weaknesses, but he had never questioned his own assumptions. Commander Voss moved quickly through the command interface. I found something. A hidden file appeared on the screen. It was not from the Academy. It was connected to an old military archive. Daniel immediately recognized the encryption pattern. His expression changed. Where did you find that? Lyra looked at him. You know it. Daniel stepped closer. Yes. The room waited. This is not from the Black Horizon unit. A moment of confusion passed through the room. Then what is it? Maya asked. Daniel looked at the file name. It is from the people who studied us. The archive opened, revealing records from the Orion conflict. But these records were different from the official history. They were created by other civilizations that had watched humanity from a distance. They had documented not human victories, but human behavior. Adaptation, cooperation, restraint. The galaxy had not been afraid of human weapons. It had been afraid of how quickly humans learned. Kale stared at the information. So the stories were true. Daniel shook his head. Some were. Some were exaggerated. That is what happens when people tell stories about things they do not understand. Rylan stepped forward. Then why hide this? Daniel looked at him. Because fear spreads faster than understanding. That answer silenced the room. Then the hidden file revealed one final message. A warning written years earlier by an unknown analyst. If humanity ever stops teaching others, The next generation will repeat the same mistakes. Lyra read the message twice. She understood now. The tattoo was never meant to represent victory. It represented a promise. A promise that the people who survived the hardest moments of history would teach others before history repeated itself. Rylan lowered his eyes. His evaluation had been designed to expose weakness. Instead, it exposed his own failure to understand the purpose behind human restraint. "You knew this would happen someday," he said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "No, I hoped it would not." The answer surprised him. "Then why are you here?" Daniel looked around at the cadets. The same young people who had laughed at a symbol they did not recognize. Because someone has to make sure the next generation knows what it means before they have to learn the hard way. The academy systems finally stabilized, but nobody celebrated. Everyone understood that the real lesson had not been about surviving a crisis. It was about understanding the people who spent their entire lives trying to prevent one. And as Daniel walked out of the operations room, Cale looked at the tattoo again. This time, he did not see an old mark. He saw a responsibility, but there was still one question left unanswered. If Daniel Brooks had carried that symbol for 12 years, why had someone worked so hard to erase its history in the first place? Part 9. For 12 years, Daniel Brooks carried a symbol that almost nobody recognized. For 12 years, he allowed people to misunderstand it. Not because he was ashamed, not because he had forgotten, but because some memories were never meant to become trophies. They were meant to become lessons. The Galactic Defense Academy returned to normal after the security incident, but the atmosphere inside the halls had changed. The cadets walked differently. They listened more carefully. They questioned their assumptions before judging what they saw. And nobody looked at Daniel's tattoo the same way again. A week after the incident, Commander Lyra Voss called the entire academy together for a special assembly. Thousands of students and instructors gathered in the main auditorium overlooking Aurelian Prime. At the center of the stage stood Daniel Brooks, still wearing the same simple uniform he had worn on his first day. No decorations, no special recognition, no attempt to appear important. Cale Theron watched from the crowd, remembering the first time he had seen Daniel. He remembered laughing. He remembered thinking the human was just another inexperienced student trying to look mysterious. Now he understood how wrong he had been. Commander Voss stepped forward. "Many of you believed history was stored in archives," she said. "You believed important moments belonged only to famous leaders and powerful civilizations." She looked toward Daniel. "You were wrong." The room remained silent. Daniel did not look comfortable receiving attention. Maya noticed and smiled slightly. Even after everything, he was still the same person. Still the man who preferred listening over speaking. Still the man who believed actions mattered more than recognition. Cale approached him after the ceremony ended. For a moment, he struggled to find the right words. "I owe you an apology," Cale said. Daniel looked at him. "For what?" Cale gave a small, embarrassed laugh. "For thinking I understood something I had never taken the time to learn." Daniel nodded. "That is a mistake everyone makes at some point." Cale looked at the tattoo. "Does it bother you when people misunderstand it?" Daniel looked down at the symbol on his arm. "No." He paused. "What bothers me is when people stop asking questions." Cale considered those words. He realized that was the difference between them. He had looked at the tattoo and searched for something to judge. Daniel had spent years carrying it as a reminder to understand. Later that evening, Daniel stood outside the academy overlooking the distant stars. Maya joined him quietly. "You know they will remember this now," she said. Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe. You do not sound convinced." He looked toward the endless sky. Stories change when people tell them too many times. The details disappear. The meaning gets lost. Maya looked at the tattoo. Then what should they remember? Daniel thought for a moment. That being strong is not about making everyone afraid of you. He looked back at the academy lights. It is about making sure others do not have to become what you had to become. Years later, students would still tell the story of the quiet human who arrived at the academy with an old tattoo and no desire for attention. They would tell how the strongest lesson he taught was not about winning battles or proving superiority. It was about restraint, about responsibility, about understanding that every person carries a history you cannot see. And somewhere in the galaxy, whenever someone saw a mark they did not understand, they remembered Daniel Brooks. They remembered that the smallest symbols could hold the biggest stories. And they remembered that humanity was never dangerous because it wanted power. Humanity was dangerous because it knew exactly how much power it had and still chose to use it carefully.